Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's Race C is Group 3 at Barcelona with no chicane, and there are actually multiple pit strategies that seem to work. Let's get into it. This week's anti-meta car is the 2018 GTR. In a race almost entirely dominated by mid-engine cars, except for of course the BRZ, the Porsche seems to be the meta, and the GTR seems to do really well against these cars, having both stability and power to pass on the straight. I managed to set a 139.8, but this car is definitely capable of probably a 0.4 or even a 0.3. As of right now, I'm the fastest GTR in the world at 34th globally, but I have a feeling that's going to change pretty soon. There are a lot of different cars in the top 100, but it really seems like the Huracan and the Porsche are your meta cars this week. On the super long straight that's leading to the first braking zone, I used to put my tires in the green part beyond the curb. I no longer do that. I still use the curb though, which is still a little bit controversial, but I do like to align my tires on the curb and then look for this digital flag marker here on the left. When my car gets entirely past that, that's when I start to brake. Braking in a straight line until I get to this little access path here, I start turning in while still on full brake and then start trail braking in as I dip down to second gear. My goal is to straddle this sausage curb, making sure I don't put my right tires in the grass at all. Continuing to steer to the right as I add throttle in third gear, when I get to the beginning of where the curb gets wider right here, I then change direction and I aim to actually miss the sausage curb the second time, lifting off the throttle just barely to make sure I don't go too wide. Continuing to steer left, we're going to stay full throttle until we get to the beginning of the grass here on the right, and then we're going to switch directions and then lift off just barely. What I'm trying to do here is just modulate the throttle so I keep up my speed but tighten the line really slowly. My goal is to apex right about when the car is facing that orange part of the wall in the distance, and then as long as the car is rotating to the right and not understeering, I can get fully on the throttle. In a perfect world, you'll be able to get on the throttle and stay on it, but of course if you feel like you're going to go off the track, it's much better just to lift off the throttle briefly than to let yourself go entirely off the track and ruin your lap. After your car straightens out, I want you to look all the way to the left on the wall. You're going to see a 100 meter board and a 50 meter board right here and right here. You'll have to do your best to approximate, but just about at the 60 meter mark is when you want to hit the brakes. As always, we start braking in a straight line, but you're going to start turning in and trail braking right as soon as you drive under that bridge. Your goal is to tighten up this corner, trail braking all the way down to second gear and getting the car rotating, steering after you're completely off the brakes and getting back on the throttle by the time you pass this F thing on the wall. Gently add throttle to make sure the car doesn't over or understeer, and when you're certain you've got grip, continue steering and full throttle it. Swing out wide as you need to. You don't have to try to force yourself all the way out, but you do want to get to the right side of the track as soon as you can. Looking for this concrete structure on the other side of the fence, that is where I like to brake, but you can also use these permanent tire lines as a reference. You can also use these tire marks as a reference for when to turn in. The shape of them is a really good reference for knowing exactly what shape you want to use for the rest of the corner. You've got to get down to second gear before you start turning in and trail braking, and I do like to pop it down to first gear as I come all the way off the brakes, adding more steering to get up on the curb, and then gently getting to second gear and adding throttle. I apexed a little bit too early and got myself a little bit oversteer, but I didn't lose that much time. You can definitely go about a tenth faster there, if not more. From here, gently curve your car and aim to put yourself directly on this curb here. Right before you hit the curb, trying to trace the shape of it, you're going to hit the brakes. Get down to second gear as quickly as you can, and as soon as it engages, start to turn in and trail brake. Come off, continue steering to the left, shift up to third gear, and then get gently back on the throttle. You only need your left tires to barely touch the red and white, and you want to treat that as one consecutive left-hand corner. The right-hand part here isn't really consequential. The end of the curb curves in just a little bit, and that tells you exactly when you want to turn in. You want to brake right before the end of it. Get yourself down to third gear just briefly, come off the brakes mid-corner, turn in harder, and then shift up to fourth gear before getting on the throttle. It's really important to come off the brakes as fast as you can and turn in even more before then getting on the throttle. If you apex right after that little sausage curb, you should be good to stay fully on the throttle as long as you continue turning in. You can see I'm adjusting my steering just a little bit. I want to turn in, but I do not want to understeer because understeer will of course send me directly off the track. For the next braking zone, I've actually completely stopped using the curbing here on the right. I look for this little post. I believe it holds the digital flag, and right when I get to it, I hit the brakes heavily and in a straight line. Before turning in, I like to get to second gear, and I wait until I'm underneath that scaffolding to start turning in. I immediately downshift to first gear and then trail brake all the way to the apex, coming off and then adding more steering before then shifting up to second gear and again very gently getting on the throttle. Once again, you only need your left tires on the red and white part of the curb there. Trying to hit this line is really important, but if your tires are spinning at all, it can cause you to slide, and you obviously don't want that. I like to aim for these permanent tire marks right here, and that's also when I change directions and then add brake. I like to try to make this a double apex, so I immediately get to the inside, apex first and second gear, and then trail off, come entirely off the brakes before turning in more and adding throttle in third gear. As you can see, I completely missed the apex, the second apex, and that's definitely more time that I could have gained in this one. Getting all the way up next to the sand, we're going to use these permanent tire marks as a note to when we should turn in, but if you want an extra reference, you can see that I'm turning in to just barely miss the end of the red and white part of the curb here on the left. I lift off the throttle just briefly before then shifting up to fourth gear and then fully getting back on the throttle, making sure that my left tires are on that inside red and white part of the curb. Maintaining maximum speed and using as much of the track requires you to just use barely any of your tires to stay on the red and white part of the curb here. Straddling this yellow sausage curb, I'm going to look for this dark mark on the track, and that's when I'm going to start turning in, downshifting to third, and braking very gently. It's not until you come off the brakes that the car's really going to want to turn in, so make sure you come off the brakes early, get your car all the way up on the apex, and then get in fourth gear before then fully getting on the throttle and committing to the exit. Don't forget to upshift to fifth and you're all done. One really big note, and I did mention this at the beginning of the breakdown, is I do not use the area of the track beyond the normal red and white curb. I used to go all the way up and actually put my right tires on the red and white curb, but the new dirty tire model seems to really dramatically affect the tires, and I'm not quite sure of it yet. I did try that line a couple times and it did not work out very well. For this really long right-hander, if you add a little bit of brakes, you can then sometimes rotate the car more and then get really aggressively on the throttle. There's definitely a lot more time to be found in this first sector. You'll probably notice that I missed the apex here. I didn't actually touch the curb. That will save you some time, and you should be able to get the car to rotate a little bit better than I did and get on the throttle earlier. The same thing for this left-hander. Actually, I apexed that one too early, which meant that I had to wait too long to get on the throttle, and I had to steer too much because of the angle, which cost me some time. This seems like a left-right kind of corner, but in reality, you can just treat it like one really sharp left-hander, and then you're going to be full throttle for that next right-hand part, so it doesn't really matter. For this long right-hander and for the final corner, it's really important that you come off the brakes entirely before adding the final amount of steering, or else you're just going to understeer. I'd suggest completely missing this inner curb. It's just going to upset the balance of the car, and it's really difficult to get grip coming out of that corner anyways. It's just going to make it much more difficult, so just avoid it. A lot of people treat this as a single late apex, but since the runoff isn't that long and you got to lift for the next corner, I think it's more important to just keep it really tight. And for this final corner, you've got to really abuse the track limits as much as you can. You just need 2 tires on the red and white, and it doesn't appear to give you any kind of dirty tires if you go beyond that. And for the final corner, make sure you come off the brakes early, really early, and get on that throttle early too. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are actually multiple pit strategies that seem to work for this race. An interesting thing about the meta car or the meta cars is they're actually not very good on tires in this race, but the pace is good enough that it kind of makes up for it. It seems that most cars are able to do either of the pit strategies. The pit strategies are as follows. You have to take a pit stop. Now that doesn't mean you have to take tires, so you could choose to pit somewhere near the middle of the race, take tires, and then have better pace for the second stint, trying to overtake people who did not choose to take tires. I've heard that it takes up to 4 seconds. We could probably really easily figure it out, but I think it takes 4 extra seconds to change tires. And while if you're just looking at raw pace, you're going to make up that pace, but the big thing to consider is track position. Assuming you're going to drive clean, and I hope every one of you is, then it's going to be very difficult to pass people. It's not easy to pass a car, even a slower car on this track, especially considering how good or good-ish the Bape is at the moment. I shouldn't have even mentioned the Bape in that. If you are in identical cars with someone you're trying to pass, even if you have better tires, it's still going to be a challenge to pull off a pass here. We'll talk in more detail about the benefits of not taking tires after this, but we're going to talk about what you can do when you do decide to take tires. Now, a lot of people will kind of simplify their strategy and think, well, it's an 11-lap race, so I'm going to pit on lap 5 or 6. In reality, the tire wear isn't bad enough that you'd have to wait till the very middle of the race, and since it's not that bad, you have multiple options in the form of a pit window. I know that I can maintain my pace in this car for about 7 laps, and beyond that it's actually not that bad, which means that I can easily pit anywhere between lap 4 and lap 7 based on who else is going in the pits and who else has already gone through the pits, and making that decision can be made on the fly. If, for instance, you encounter a driver that you are faster than, and it looks like they're not going to go in the pits at the end here, and you're in your pit window, it might be a good decision to then go in the pits. The opposite could also be the case. Let's say someone in front of you is going into the pits and you had planned on going to the pits. You might want to stretch out that first stint until afterwards, because if that person is any slower than you, they're going to hold you back. And even if they're not slower than you, they're going to give you dirty air, which is going to make your tire wear worse, and it's going to slow you down anyways. Someone earlier on my stream mentioned that they thought because you were going slower in the dirty air and in the traffic that it might actually protect your tires, but the opposite is true, unfortunately. You're going to have so much dirty air and you're going to be taking really strange lines, probably braking when you don't necessarily mean to, getting on the throttle at different times. It's going to essentially change enough of what you do that your tire wear is going to suffer from it, not just directly but indirectly as well. Another thing that I pretty frequently talk about is the social aspect of racing. Now, I know that Jinkies and V-Diesel in front are both very fast drivers, so if I try to pass them anywhere towards the beginning of the race, it's probably just going to slow both of us or all of us down. If I can choose to work with these guys, both by nonverbal or actual verbal communication, like if you just make an agreement with them, or if you flash their lights, or if you just bump them instead of going for a pass, then working together can be really efficient. You might have some dirty air, but you'll also have the slipstream on the straight, and if you are able to bump draft on the straight, then it could have a net positive effect on your lap times. Jumping all the way up to the end of lap 5, we're able to get past the vast majority of the people, just passing them on the track, which is huge if we also have a really good pit strategy. You can see that I am very purple. I'm about 3/10 purple, and that's still with a compromised lap with dirty air and with having to fight people in the beginning of the lap. Now, going to the pits, I can see that Jakey's going to go in the pits, and I had already planned on going to the pits, but Vin Diesel stays out, and that might actually be an even better idea. We had only just passed people on track, and so we didn't have a chance to really use our good pace. The best thing that you can do when you get yourself separate from the pack is to go just absolutely as fast as you possibly can. That is your #1 goal. If you pass 1 lap earlier than someone who is right in front of you, and you can go just a 10th faster on your next lap than they go on their subsequent lap, then you can end up in front of them. If you can expand that thinking to all the other types of pit strategies people will be using, maybe pitting 2 laps before or 2 laps afterwards, the best thing that you want to do, like I said, is just go as fast as you can as soon as you're separate. And since we had just separated from the pack, we didn't have a chance to really use our pace. Vin Diesel decided not to go at that point, and so you're going to see what kind of benefits you can have from really extending the stint where you have the opportunity to drive in clean air. You may have noticed that I exited the pits really poorly and I understeered in T1, and I'm remembering that our buddy Serious Goblin had asked me to give you braking points coming out of the pits. It's important to brake before the end of the white line, and as long as you are braking well before that, you should be able to make the first corner pretty easily. Jumping forward just a little bit, it's important to know the capabilities of the other cars as well. Our buddy Peepo is using the BRZ, and the BRZ is incredibly good on tire wear, but it does not have a lot of power. So with the GTR, you should be able to, at least in the straights, pull up close enough to then get all the way in front of him and pull off a pass. The other thing is Peepo is going for the no tire change strategy. That means that despite the fact that the car is really good on tires, he still has been wearing them out for 7 laps at this point, and Jake and I are both on very fresh new tires. Once again, jumping ahead a couple laps, we are now right behind Lunker, looking to get into second place. Now, despite the fact that he is in one of the meta cars, the Lamborghini, it's good because it handles incredibly well, and it's got good acceleration, good grip, but it can be kind of sketchy to drive, and it does not have a lot of power. So if you can get close enough, you should be able to easily pass a Lamborghini on the front straight, as you can see right here. Not only that, you can see that I hit a 140.5, and that's in a lap where I had dirty air from the Lamborghini for multiple corners. I did have the slipstream, but it didn't really take effect until after the start-finish line. So as you can see, the car is definitely capable of low 140s, if not even better by someone magic like Damien or something like that. Now, unfortunately, I was pushed entirely off the track earlier on in the race. I didn't show it, but I was pushed entirely off on turn 2 by Ram 246 Alex, and that kind of cost me a much better result. I'll show you what I mean. You can see that Gregory is 28.3 seconds ahead going into the final lap, or not quite at the final lap yet, but he's about to enter the pits, and when he comes out, you're going to see it didn't quite work out. Now, obviously, he's not going to take tires if he's pitting on the very last opportunity he gets. It wouldn't make sense to have good tires for a single lap if it costs you 4 seconds. So we know that he's got bad tires, but the car's fast enough, and it is at the end of my second stint, so my tires aren't perfect anymore. And the Porsche is just good enough. He's a good enough driver that I did catch him, but it wasn't quite enough. As you can see, he was able to hit his marks. He stayed on his line. He didn't do anything crazy. I couldn't have lunged there without risking hitting him, and I wasn't about to ruin his race for a victory. He lost it a little bit, but kept up his momentum, saved it, and there was nothing I can do. That was really well played on his part, but I am pretty upset that Ram246 Alex punted me entirely off the track, didn't slow down, and that definitely cost me the win. If he hadn't done that, I would have won probably before that last corner. Probably a lot before that last corner. As promised, I did get a good result with the no tire change strategy. Like I said before, you do have to take a pit, but you do not need to change tires. And so the strategy kind of transforms in a big way when you're going to do it this way. If you're going to choose to do this type of strategy, then the ultimate goal is just to go in the pits when there's not going to be anyone else around. If you're starting from the back, it's almost always going to be on the very first lap, unless someone that you think is going to slow you down is going to be in front of you and they're going to pit at the same time. If that happens, just pit on the second lap. If you're starting from the front, then it's important to try to get as far out in front of everyone as you possibly can, not deal with any kind of battles, or if you do, you might want to pit early, but that comes with the risk of ending up in traffic for the people who are at the back of the pack. Now, the pit delta is somewhere like 26 to 27 seconds, so chances are if you pit lap 1, you're not going to have any issues if you start from the front and pit lap 1, but if you start from the front, hit lap 1, and then are much faster than the people at the back, you might run into them, and people at the back don't tend to have the same courtesy and or skill as those who are in the front, so it's kind of a risky idea in general. I'm realizing that I just kind of ranted for a really long time. If you're starting from the back, try to pit at the very beginning, don't take tires, and then you'll have as much clean air as you possibly can. If you're in the front, then what you want to do is pit as late as you possibly can to make sure you're not running into any of the back markers. You can also try the flex strategy. That is trying to go for a pit window where you're going to end up changing your tires, but if things seem sketchy and if there are a lot of people every single time you go in the pits, and it seems like they're going to slow you down, then you might want to just pit somewhere towards the middle and take a chance on not taking tires. The best thing that can happen is you'll be put a few seconds ahead of the people you were battling with, and despite the fact that they're going to have better tires than you, you should be able to stay away from them as long as you're staying clean and you don't mess up your tires. Now, I don't really need to show you any of the details, any of the passes or anything like that. We did make some passes on track, but we mostly just drove by ourselves. So we're going to jump all the way to the end so you can see the kind of tire wear you can expect with this car when you don't take tires. It was at this point of this race that I didn't actually know that Wadadley Madness had not taken a pit. I think he might have gotten hit at the beginning, which pushed him back here with us. So he still had to complete his pit, unfortunately, which put him towards the back. But Pepe Le Pew went in the pits right as I was completing that hairpin, and I had known from paying attention to when people were going in the pits that I should be able to be all the way in front of him by the time he comes out of the pits. As you can see, my left front tire is taking the most amount of abuse. You can expect that on this kind of track, on a really twisty kind of track. The FR cars are going to suffer from understeer and they're going to scrub their tires. But of course, if you're really careful with this car and you use a good brake balance, I used +3, then you should be able to protect the tires, just trying not to be too crazy, try not to let the car slide at all, and of course, avoiding any kind of incidents. Another big thing that causes tire wear that not a lot of people think about is damage. If you get damaged, then that part of your car is going to actually, well, whatever part of your car that is nearest a tire, it's going to damage that tire a lot more than if you didn't sustain any damage. So just staying as clean as you possibly can, not sliding, is really the key to saving your tires. And as you can see, despite the fact that I didn't take tires and I pit at the very beginning, my tires are hot. They've been going for 10 laps straight now. I'm actually still faster than VRS Pepe Le Pew, who is in a similar boat. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just to summarize, because we've covered a lot in this video, there are 2 main tire strategies, and you can choose to change your tire strategy mid-race if you choose to. You can pit anywhere between lap 4 and 7 safely without losing any kind of pace with this car. And you do need to take tires if you do that, of course, but at any given time, you can just decide to not take tires, gain the bonus with anyone around you by not having to take the tires, so you'll come out of the pits a lot earlier than them. And of course, you can also just choose at the very beginning to not take tires, commit to that, and either pit at the very end or the very beginning based on where it is that you're starting. Thank you again for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I'll be making another one of these guides next week. I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. I love every single one of you. Thank you very much.